I'm not trusting and I'm not delivering this message. We got something special coming for the community. The American Indigenous Street and Music Festival in Atlanta in ATL 2025, June 2025. Support this. We need the community. We need our people who acknowledge that they are the real American Indigenous people to support this community event, the American Indigenous Street and Music Festival 2025 in Atlanta, June 2025. Be there, be square. We'll always be square, stand on your square, but be there and show your support. Donate to the American Indigenous Street and Music Festival, June 2025 in Atlanta. This is for the community. This is for us. And I'm not trusting and I'm not delivering this message. I'm going to be speaking on America, the United States of America, and the vast economy that it now has. And I want to go back to specifically, the origin of that economy. Where did it come from? Because a lot of people try to say, economists and, particularly Caucasian economists, they love to say that the United States economy is a homegrown economy that came through immigrants coming together and producing industries, which is not true. The United States economy is built off of the slave or the indigenous American American indigenous slave trade, because we got to call it that, an American indigenous slave trade. There was no African slave trade. There was an American indigenous slave trade in which American indigenous people, bronze-skinned people, so-called black people will be called black Americans today, or African Americans today, which they're not. Their labor, their slave labor went into growing the United States economy. Okay. The economy comes from the land. This is an agrarian society, meaning that this is an agricultural society here in America. The agriculture of America was produced by American indigenous slaves, American indigenous indentured servants, aka black people, black Americans. This is who produced the agricultural landscape and the foundation of the United States economy. I want you all to think, they always promote this lie that so-called black people black people came from Africa, were taken from Africa by Europeans to come here and pick cotton. And that was the end of their value. So let me get this straight. These people went all the way over to Africa, supposedly brought all these people back and built up a economical foundation and base for slavery, right? Or for African slaves, right? African slaves who they said could, of course, illiterate, didn't know the language, right? Forced over here, didn't really build much in the lands where they supposedly came from. You're going to tell me that you took a primitive people who are only good for picking cotton and built a whole economy, built a whole economic system off for these people back? Because keep in mind, the slave trade was a very successful financial endeavor for slave traders. So I don't get where cotton pickers are valuable. Anybody, as they say, can do that. And I don't see where Africans who are not indigenous to America, how they would be valuable here. I questioned that in my last video, how Africans who are not indigenous to America, how would they be valuable in America if they could not speak the language, which they couldn't, if they didn't really build things in their society, because the Europeans love, the European racists, or as I said, the Euro racists love to say that the so-called Africans were primitive, that you had to teach them how to do this and teach them how to do that. You had to teach them. You basically saying they civilized you. So my question is this: how is it that people who you have to do so much for, how are they valuable? Because from the time they took so-called slaves from Africa, black so-called African slaves from Africa, there was a immediate there would be it have to be an immediate benefit for that. Where's the immediate benefit in having to teach people how to speak the language, how to work, understand the orders you're giving them? Where's the benefit in that? There's no benefit in having to groom people to be able to even work and serve you. There's no benefit in that. You're going to put more resources into getting them ready to do what they do, and then you're only getting them ready to pick cotton. That doesn't make sense. So a lot of lies are being told. A lot of things. The lie is a story that doesn't make sense. That's what a lie is. A lie is a story that doesn't make sense. And this is what the transatlantic slave trade story is. It's a lie, because it makes no sense that they would bring people who are not able to speak the language, who are illiterate, who are, as you say, primitive, over here to work just to pick cotton. People who will be fighting you, people who will be dying on ships. It's not economically feasible to do that. What is economically feasible to do is to force the people who are already there around you in the country, who were there before you. It is economically feasible to force them to work. Now, the Euro racists want to say that such a people did not exist. That's a lie, because they tell you in the description of the slaves that they were selling slaves who were planters, meaning that they basically knew how to farm the land. They were planters. There were carpenters. There were women who were seamstresses. You had blacksmiths. These were skills, which is what made the slaves valuable. These were skills that these slaves had, or so-called slaves had. The American indigenous people, this is the skills they had, which made them valuable, on the auction blocks, made them valuable on the New York Stock Exchange as the first stock traded. They were trading slave labor, trading slaves on the New York Stock Exchange. So you're telling me they're trading African slaves on the New York Stock Exchange? That's fake. They were trading American indigenous people on the New York Stock Exchange, because it would make sense to utilize them as slave labor. If you can force them into servitude for you, it would make more sense to make those people, the American indigenous people, or who y'all call the American Indians, the people, the copper colored races that were here in America before the Europeans came. And, that's the 1828 Merriam-Webster definition of American. That's attributed to original copper-colored races, the indigenous people. That's what that's attributed to. It is attributed to that, to those people. It is attributed to those people who are those real indigenous people who created the economy, for America through their harvesting of the land. Because keep in mind, the economy came from the land, the agriculture. You see, this is why they allowed so-called Black Americans, which are really American Indians, descendants of the American Indians. They allowed us to have agricultural colleges. The U.S. government allowed us after slavery to have agricultural colleges, like Tuskegee Institute, which was an agricultural college. Now, how is it that these Black so-called Negroes, Black American, whatever you want to call them, how were they so skilled in agriculture, meaning getting and harvesting and growing from the land? Because that is a generational thing. Our people have always been growing from the land, which is what made us valuable. Does that not make sense? It makes more sense to enslave American indigenous people who were here growing on the land, harvesting on the land, yet letting the land yield for them. And the Europeans just came and made them do that for them. That's slavery. That's why one of the Euro racists from that time, and I forget what his name is, one of the Euro racist slave owners in the South said, slavery is the lifeblood of the South. Slavery is the lifeblood of the South. Now, let me ask you a question. Why would they say slavery is the lifeblood of the South if all our people was doing was picking cotton? We were doing way, way more than picking cotton. We were growing on the land, picking the cotton, harvesting it, building on the land, building houses for the clearing off roads, building railroads. Our people were doing everything to build an infrastructure of what of what would become the United States of America. We built the early infrastructures. It wasn't until later in the early 20th century where the United States government started allowing immigrants to come in here and pick up where our people left off. But the people who built the railroads, it was American Indians or American Indigenous people. So y'all got to get that idea out of your head of the American Indian being the so-called Native Americans. Those are not the American Indians. The American Indians are us. That's why even to this day they refer to our people as West Indian over in the Caribbean islands. So we just an extension of the West India or that West Indian root, because why were they referring to our people as Indian or West Indian? And even here in America, if you look at the early slave records, they never referred to our people as Africans. They referred to our people as Indigenous, Indian. Then they start changing us over to colored and Negro and mulatto. These were all the same interchangeable names for the same people, us. But they started off calling us Indians, those copper-colored races that were here, that the Europeans found here when they came. But now the Europeans have stepped into our role and they're calling themselves Americans. You see, so the U.S. economy, there could be no U.S. economy if it wasn't for the American indigenous people working and building up and harvesting on the land and growing and making a lot of people rich, even insurance companies. Our people, through their labor, built the United States economy. When, again, going back to the Tuskegee Institute, going back to where Booker T. Washington started that, you do know that the only reason the U.S. government and the state of Alabama allowed the Tuskegee Institute to be because the crops that they were growing at Tuskegee, because they were growing crops there, a huge yield of crops, they were being given to the states. The state was taking the crops that the school was growing. The students were growing crops. So we basically were sharecropping with the damn state of Alabama. Tuskegee was sharecropping with the state of Alabama. So that's why they let bronze people, so-called black people, have agricultural schools, because the Euro racists, they knew that they were going to reap the benefits of the harvest of our labor. That's why they had up until the 20th century sharecropping. Sharecropping was basically our people doing all the work like we've been doing in slavery, growing the crops, harvesting the crops, picking the crops, and giving it to the white man. And we were supposed to be splitting the crops, and they didn't even split the crops, but they would still cheat us. They would find a way to have us working for free. You see, they still try to have a way to where they keep all the money that we work and tell them, at the end of the year, y'all owe for this equipment, you owe for that equipment. So they were trying to keep us in perpetual slavery for them. They still didn't really know how to farm even after we showed them, because the only reason white farmers know how to farm, the only reason white farmers know how to farm in America is because they learned it, their ancestors learned it from the American indigenous people who were in captivity. They learned it from them. They learned how to farm from our people. Europeans, Caucasians did not know how to farm in America. And this is why a lot of them starved in America. They didn't know how to farm here. They didn't know how to hunt here. They didn't know how to do anything. That's why they ended up starving here. A lot of them resorted to cannibalism, as in the Donner Party. You see, they needed slavery to survive. They needed this economy to survive. You see, they needed the economy and they needed slavery to survive. You see, without the economy, without slavery to survive here in this society, then there would be no economy. There would be no United States. They try to lie and say that the Asians built the railroads. They built less than 700 tracks, 700 feet of the railroad, and they did that in a certain part. They wasn't, but our people were enslaved to the railroad companies. Our people were enslaved to the railroad companies, where they were made to work hard, long hours, putting down track and things like that, and not getting compensated for that. Not being compensated for all the track they laid, all the roads our people cleared, all the buildings we built. You see, all the crops and things that we harvested for this country. Not to mention the blacksmithing. Our people was enslaved to, from what I was seeing, like a lot of our people worked for gun companies, because a lot of our people know how to do blacksmith. Our people pretty much know how to do everything here to support an economy and the society that we were not allowed to participate in. You see, we were not allowed to participate in the largely in the new U.S. economy, because they wanted to basically use us. The Euro racists wanted to use us to build the economy, and they didn't want us to have money because they were trying to put themselves ahead of everybody. So to have the American indigenous people here, the real American Indians here, who have always been building on and growing on the land, to have them, make a separate economy or make money independently of the Euro racists, that became a threat. That was a threat for us to be able to have an independent economy. This is why they would always come and take land from us, or if we had something built up on the land, they'd come and destroy it, because any progress, any independent progress on our own soil says that we're still here and that we're still alive as American indigenous people. See, they've been trying to kill that in our people, who we are as American Indians or American indigenous people who are connected to the land, not just America, but not just North America, but South America, Central America. I heard this guy, Tariq Nasheed, he was going on in one of his spaces talking about we indigenous. Now Tariq Nasheed, I find it funny, Tariq Nasheed now he's starting to use the word indigenous heavy now, super heavy now. He using the word indigenous. Listen to some of his last stuff, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, brother. I'm like, because everybody know I was the only one that was really, really pushing that we American indigenous. Dane Calloway and them guys was pushing American Indians and what tribe and all this other stuff. See, I had a problem with this, and I said that I don't push the tribal thing, even though I know what tribes my mother and father's people come from. Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia, Pamunkey, and I think Cherokee. I already know that my people part of that. That go without saying. But our people are also a part of the Mesoamerican history and culture of the Americas. So when we say you're an American Indian, because the Mesoamericans would not be considered or call themselves Indians, they're called Mesoamericans, right? Original indigenous Americans, So I said, by calling us American indigenous people, we're connecting ourselves to the land and not to just a culture, because American Indian culture puts you in contact with culture. I said we in connection with the land, not culture. So we went from Mesoamericans to American Indians, now to Black Americans. So it's key to keep us locked to the land as American indigenous people. So, because, cultures come and go. Cultures come and go. But people who are indigenous to the land, that's powerful. That's forever. And they've been trying to break us out of that. They've been trying to Africanize us and pull our roots up out of the American soil and plant them in Africa. When I heard Tariq Nasheed arguing back and forth with this guy about it, it's his argument, when he's the one that said that nonsense about us being indigenous to the United States of America. It's like he keep doubling down on that, which makes me think he's being kind of disingenuous, disrespect to him. But I'm like, come on, man. You something talking about we indigenous to the United States of America. We indigenous to all of the America. North America, South America, Central America, Mexico, Jamaica, all the islands and all the all of that. We indigenous to all of the Americas. South America, North America, all of that. Not the United States of America. The United States of America is not a country. The United States of America is a corporation that has taken up residence in America. I'm going to say it again. The United States is a corporate governmental entity. The United States is a corporate governmental entity that has taken up residence in America, taken hold of the resources of America, maldistributing them to Europeans. You see, that's what the United States is. The United States is the system of white supremacy, if you want to be technical about it. So him saying that we are indigenous to the United States of America, that's like you saying we indigenous to this corporation called the United States, or that we somehow belong to the United States. We do not. We are indigenous to America, all of America, South, Central, and North America, before the formation of the United States. Before that, before the Europeans came here, we were always indigenous to America. We don't have no African origin, because Tariq Nasheed keeps trying to double down and triple down and even quadrupling down on this ethnogenesis of these Africans coming over here during the slave trade and mixing in with the indigenous copper-colored races, and thus we are the product of that. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's misinformation right there Tariq Nasheed gave. And no disrespect to him, but again, you giving misinformation, bro. Because you yourself said only a very, very small number. I remember you saying this, only a small number, you like 2 or 3% made it from Africa into America. And that cut off in 1808. In 1808, the U.S. stopped any form of Africans coming in here or trickling in here because he tried to make it seem like they went and brought a lot of them in here. And that's not true. A lot of them got dropped off in the West Indies, you see, or they didn't even barely make it here because, again, why would you bring unskilled people to a place where there's skilled labor? Why would you bring unskilled, rough people? Why would you bring unskilled, rough people into a space where there is no, into a space where you have people who are skilled labor working here? Why would you bring people who don't know how to do nothing, don't know how to speak the language, nothing? Why would you go and bring a bunch of them here to do what? Make that make sense to me when you got indigenous people working for you in your fields, picking cotton, growing tobacco and picking it and pulling it out, and all the other crops, food crops and things that end up on the tables of people in the early Americas, because these people didn't know how to grow on the land, and it started the whole thing of a market. The markets started where people could go to the markets and buy their food because the indigenous people would come and sell their products to the markets. Or the Europeans would go and buy it from them and who had slaves. But they would set up markets for these people to go to. So they wouldn't have to go out and grow food because a lot of them couldn't grow food. A lot of them couldn't hunt. So they had to set up markets. Markets were set up for them. The markets were set up to make food accessible to Europeans who did not know how to farm. That's what markets were set up at. That was the first time you heard of markets here in the Americas. Other than now you did have bronze people running street markets, indigenous street markets and whatnot, places where they would let people come and trade for food and stuff, whatever they needed. They had stuff like that, but it was like markets that was set up for the people to go in and to, Europeans to go in, and Euro Caucasian, and immigrant Americans to go shopping and pick up their food. That's where the supermarket came from. That's where the markets came from. You see, that's where that come from. They was getting their food from the slave owners. They were getting their food from the slave owners. Their vegetables and fruits and stuff was coming from the slave owners. And that was going to the market for the Europeans to buy. You see. But all that came from American indigenous people working on the land, growing food on the land, harvesting land. All that comes from there. Not to mention the insurance companies that made a fortune off of insuring slaves. Barclays, I forget what the other one, quite a bunch of them are, Lords of London. They think they had a hand in enslaving, insuring slaves, I should say. Insuring slaves. But they were not insuring any African slaves. They were insuring American indigenous people. People that were thrown into bondage, thrown into captivity. They weren't insuring those kind of people. So we got to be very mindful of the false narrative that people tell people that look like us, people who are amongst us, telling us that we come from Africa, that we part of some ethnogenesis, or that all life started in Africa. I even debunked that lie about all life starting in Africa. That's a lie. We have our own independent genesis here in America that has nothing to do with Africa. I'm talking about us as American indigenous people of bronze descent. We have our own origin, our own genesis here in the Americas without African, with zero African influence. You see, because, people like your Tariq Nasheed, and they make it look bad on bronze American indigenous people, or just bronze people, so-called Black Americans, by not letting it be known that the reason why we are hated here in America is because we are the real American Indians. We are the real American Indians who have no African connection, who have no connection to Africa whatsoever. We are American originals. And that's it. Close this out in the name of Amen, by the power of Amen. Amen we trust, and Amen we think, and Amen we live forever. We out.